The fastest way to discover your worth is to watch someone replace you and then realize they never understood what they lost. The flash of cameras painted streaks of white across the ballroom walls as laughter drifted beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most families earned in a year. The city skyline glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, stretching across Manhattan like a field of stars. Every executive, investor, and reporter in the room seemed focused on the same thing. Ethan Whitmore. At 36, he was the face of Whitmore Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country. His tailored black tuxedo fit perfectly, his smile appeared effortless, and every conversation seemed to orbit around him. The headlines loved him. The business world admired him. And tonight, standing beside him beneath a sea of cameras, was Chloe Kensington. Her hand rested lightly on his arm as photographers called their names from every direction. Over here. One more picture. Ethan, look this way. Chloe smiled naturally, practiced and polished. The daughter of a powerful venture capitalist, she belonged in rooms like this. At least that was what everyone seemed to think. Ethan leaned slightly toward her as another camera flash exploded across the room. The image would be everywhere by morning. Business magazines, financial blogs, social media feeds. Every outlet would run the same story. America's rising CEO and his glamorous new partner. Nobody in the room mentioned Ariana Brooks. Nobody asked where she had gone. Nobody wondered why the woman who had spent nearly 7 years beside Ethan had vanished from every company event, every shareholder dinner, every interview. It had only been 1 week. 1 week since Ethan had ended their relationship. 1 week since Ariana had walked out of his penthouse carrying nothing but a small suitcase and the last pieces of her dignity. 1 week. The realization settled heavily in her chest as she stared at the image glowing from her laptop screen hundreds of miles away. Rain tapped softly against the apartment window beside her. The room was small, quiet, barely furnished. A temporary rental she had. Chosen because nobody here knew her name. Nobody knew she had once helped build a company now valued at nearly $2 billion. Nobody knew she had spent countless nights reviewing financial models while Ethan slept. Nobody knew she had believed they were building a future together. The screen illuminated her face as article after article appeared. Ethan Whitmore and Chloe Kensington. Ethan Whitmore and Chloe Kensington. Ethan Whitmore and Chloe Kensington. Ariana closed the laptop slowly. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic below. She sat motionless for several seconds, her hands folded in her lap. No tears came. They had already come earlier in the week. Quiet tears. Private tears. The kind nobody sees. Now there was only stillness. The kind that arrives after something important breaks. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. Ariana stood and crossed the room. The city lights reflected faintly in the glass. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes. Tense shoulders. A woman who looked older than she had 7 days ago. She thought about the first office. The tiny workspace above a coffee shop in Brooklyn. The folding tables. The cheap chairs. The long nights. The impossible dreams. Back then, Ethan used to talk about changing the world. Back then, they celebrated every new client with takeout pizza and paper cups of soda. Back then, success had felt personal. Human. Somewhere along the way, something changed. Somewhere between private jets, investor meetings, and magazine covers, Ethan stopped seeing the people standing beside him. He only saw what stood ahead of him. Ariana pressed her palm lightly against the cool glass. Below, headlights flowed through the streets like rivers of white and red. For the first time all week, her breathing felt steady. Not because the pain was gone. It wasn't. But because a realization had finally arrived. Ethan had replaced her in a week. That fact would never change. The world had seen it. The headlines had confirmed it. The cameras had celebrated it. But another truth existed beneath the surface. Something quieter. Something stronger. A person could be replaced in someone's life. But they could never be replaced in their own story. Ariana closed her eyes briefly. Then she walked toward the small bedroom and opened the closet. Inside sat a single suitcase. She pulled it onto the bed and began folding clothes carefully. One shirt, one jacket, one pair of jeans. No hesitation, no anger, no dramatic goodbye, just a decision. By midnight, the apartment looked exactly as it had when she arrived. Empty, temporary, forgettable. Ariana stood near the doorway holding her coat. Her phone buzzed once. A message from an old colleague. Heard about Ethan. Are you okay? She stared at the screen for a moment before typing 4 simple words. I'll be more than okay. Then she slipped the phone into her pocket and walked into the night. The rain had stopped. The streets shimmered beneath the city lights. Somewhere across the country, Ethan Whitmore was probably still smiling for cameras. Somewhere inside a ballroom filled with applause and champagne, he believed he had already moved on. He didn't know that the woman he replaced in a week had just taken the first step toward becoming someone the world would never overlook again. A person does not become invisible overnight. They disappear one compromise at a time until nobody remembers where the light originally came from. 3 days after leaving New York, Ariana Brooks found herself standing on a quiet street in Boston as autumn wind carried golden leaves across the sidewalk. The city felt unfamiliar, and that was exactly what she wanted. No reporters, no business magazines, no investors who recognized her face from old company events. Just distance. The morning air was cold enough to sting her cheeks as she stepped into a small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a tailor. The bell above the door chimed softly. Nobody looked up. Nobody knew her. For the first time in years, she was simply another customer ordering coffee before work. Yet work was the one thing she no longer had. At least not officially. Ariana carried her cup to a table near the window and opened her laptop. The screen reflected tired eyes and a future that suddenly felt uncertain. Her savings would last. She had always been careful with money. That was one of the reasons Whitmore Dynamics survived its early years. While Ethan dreamed in bold headlines, Ariana built spreadsheets. While he pitched investors, she managed payroll. While he chased opportunities, she made sure the company could survive another month. Few people knew that. Fewer cared. Success had a habit of attaching itself to the loudest voice in the room. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then she opened a folder she had not touched in years. Hundreds of files appeared. Financial projections, product roadmaps, investor presentations, early strategy documents. Some dated back nearly a decade. Ariana clicked one at random. The document opened. Her name appeared at the top beside a date from 8 years earlier. She stared at it silently. The memory arrived instantly. A cramped office above a coffee shop in Brooklyn. A broken air conditioner. 2 folding desks pushed together. Ethan sitting across from her at 2 in the morning while rain hammered the windows. Back then they had nothing except ambition and belief. She could still hear his voice. One day this company is going to change everything. She remembered laughing. Not because she doubted him, but because the printer had jammed for the 3rd time that night. They had worked until sunrise anyway. Ariana leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The memories continued. She remembered drafting the company's first expansion plan. She remembered convincing a skeptical investor to give them a chance when their bank account barely covered rent. She remembered eating takeout noodles at midnight while reviewing contracts. Every milestone, every breakthrough, every setback. She had been there. Not as an employee, not as a supporter, as a builder. The forgotten founder. A knock against the window startled her. She opened her eyes. Outside, pedestrians moved through the city without noticing her. Life continued. The world had not stopped because her heart was broken. Strange how painful that realization felt at first. Stranger still how freeing it became. Ariana looked back at the screen. For years she had tied her identity to one company, one relationship, one future. Now all 3 were gone. The emptiness frightened her. But beneath the fear, something else was beginning to grow. Space. Space for possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. Her phone vibrated. An email notification appeared. The sender's name made her pause. Professor Leonard Hayes. She had not spoken to him in nearly 5 years. He had taught entrepreneurship at Columbia and later became one of the most respected advisors in venture capital. Curious, she opened the message. Ariana, I heard what happened. The industry talks more than it should. I also remember something many people have forgotten. You were always the strategist. If you are willing, I would like to introduce you to someone. The message ended with a phone number and a simple sentence. Talent rarely disappears. It relocates. Ariana stared at the screen for several seconds. Outside, sunlight finally pushed through the clouds, casting warm reflections across the glass. She smiled for the first time in days. It was small, almost invisible, but it was real. Across the country, Ethan Whitmore stood in a conference room surrounded by executives discussing quarterly growth projections. Chloe sat beside him, elegant and confident as always. The numbers looked strong. The future appeared bright. Yet even as charts illuminated giant screens across the room, Ethan's attention drifted momentarily toward the empty chair near the end of the table. The seat Ariana used to occupy. Nobody sat there anymore. Nobody noticed. Nobody except him. The meeting continued. Forecasts, revenue targets, expansion plans. Business moved forward exactly as it should. But somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the confidence and applause and success, a foundation stone had quietly been removed. And nobody yet understood how much of the building had once rested upon it. Success rarely changes people all at once. More often, it rewards the habits they already had and magnifies the flaws they refused to confront. 2 months after Ariana left, Whitmore Dynamics appeared stronger than ever. The company's stock climbed steadily. New investors arrived. Industry publications praised Ethan's leadership. Every conference seemed eager to place him on stage. Every business magazine wanted his opinion. From the outside, the company looked unstoppable. Inside headquarters, however, something subtle had begun to shift. The glass walls still reflected ambition. The elevators still carried executives to meetings filled with charts and projections. Yet the atmosphere felt different. Less disciplined, less focused, more concerned with appearances than execution. Chloe Kensington had become a permanent presence. Her ideas were welcomed immediately. Her recommendations rarely faced scrutiny. Board members admired her connections and influence. Ethan appreciated how easily she navigated elite social circles. Together, they attended investor dinners, charity galas, and private networking events that filled newspapers with flattering headlines. What many people did not realize was that Ariana had never built relationships around attention. She built them around trust. The difference was invisible at first. One Thursday afternoon, a senior operations manager entered Ethan's office carrying a thick folder. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly below. Ethan barely looked up from his tablet. "What is it?" he asked. "The Phoenix rollout schedule," the manager replied. "There are concerns about timing." Ethan nodded impatiently. "We have reviewed it already. Ariana used to handle the final implementation reviews," the manager said carefully. The room became quiet. Ethan finally looked up. The manager immediately regretted mentioning her name. "We do not need Ariana to review a schedule," Ethan said. "Move forward." The manager hesitated. "There are still unresolved issues." "Then solve them." The conversation ended there. The manager left carrying the folder. Ethan returned to his tablet. Yet for several seconds he found himself staring at nothing. The mention of Ariana's name lingered longer than he expected. Across the country, Ariana sat inside a conference room overlooking Boston Harbor. Gray clouds drifted above the water while sailboats moved slowly across the distance. The room contained only 3 people. Professor Leonard Hayes sat at one end of the table. Beside him was Victoria Langford, managing director of a respected venture capital firm. Ariana listened quietly as they discussed market opportunities. She did not oversell herself. She did not exaggerate her accomplishments. She simply answered questions. Thoughtfully. Precisely. By the end of the meeting, Victoria leaned back and smiled. "Most founders tell me what they want to build," she said. "You are the first person this month who explained why a company might fail before it succeeds." Ariana smiled faintly. "Ignoring weaknesses does not make them disappear." Victoria exchanged a glance with Leonard. "Exactly." 3 weeks later, Ariana accepted a strategic consulting position with the firm. It was not glamorous. It did not come with magazine covers or interviews. But it gave her something she valued more. A chance to build again. Day after day, she worked quietly. She analyzed struggling companies, improved business models, reorganized operations, strengthened financial strategies. Her reputation began spreading through boardrooms she had never entered before. Not because she sought recognition, because results followed her work. Meanwhile, at Whitmore Dynamics, warning signs continued appearing. Small problems, easy to dismiss individually. A delayed launch, an underestimated budget, a supplier dispute, customer complaints that took longer to resolve. Nothing catastrophic, nothing dramatic. Yet each issue required time, attention, and discipline. The very qualities Ariana once protected fiercely. One evening, Ethan remained alone inside headquarters long after most employees had gone home. The city lights glittered outside like scattered diamonds. His office felt unusually quiet. A stack of reports sat on his desk waiting for review. He opened the first file, then the second, then the third. Every document seemed to raise another question, another concern, another complication. Frustration tightened across his face. Years ago, these reports always arrived organized. Solutions accompanied problems. Risks came with contingency plans. For a moment, he found himself remembering late nights in Brooklyn when Ariana sat across from him. Surrounded by spreadsheets and notebooks. She never complained, never demanded recognition. She simply solved problems before they became crises. Ethan pushed the thought away immediately. He stood and walked toward the window. The reflection staring back at him looked successful, confident, admired. Yet something felt missing. Not enough to name. Not enough to understand. Just enough to notice. Far away in Boston, Ariana stepped out of her office building into crisp evening air. The harbor lights shimmered across the water. She paused for a moment and looked toward the horizon. Her life was still rebuilding. Her future remained uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, she no longer felt defined by what she had lost. She was becoming someone new. And neither she nor Ethan yet understood that the distance growing between their lives would eventually become the most important story either of them had ever lived. Winter arrived quietly in Boston. Snow dusted rooftops, harbor winds carried a sharp chill through the city, and Ariana Brooks settled into a rhythm she had not experienced in years. Her days were no longer consumed by someone else's vision. They belonged entirely to her. Each morning before sunrise, she walked the same path along the waterfront with a cup of coffee warming her hands. The sky would slowly brighten above the water while the city awakened around her. During those quiet moments, she often reflected on how different life felt now. The pain had not disappeared completely. Some wounds required time, but the constant ache that once followed her everywhere had begun to fade. In its place came clarity. At Whitmore Dynamics, however, clarity seemed increasingly difficult to find. Another quarter had ended. Revenue remained strong. Investors still applauded growth. Yet inside the company, tension continued building beneath the polished surface. More departments struggled to coordinate major projects. Costs rose faster than expected. Timelines slipped. Meetings grew longer. Solutions became harder to find. One Monday morning, the executive conference room overlooked a gray Manhattan skyline as senior leaders gathered around a massive glass table. Ethan Whitmore listened as department heads reviewed updates. The atmosphere felt different than it once had. Less confident, more defensive. Every presentation seemed to contain explanations rather than achievements. Every forecast carried uncertainty hidden beneath optimistic language. Chloe Kensington sat beside him reviewing reports. She remained composed, elegant, and persuasive. Whenever concerns emerged, she redirected attention toward future opportunities. The board appreciated her optimism. Yet optimism alone could not solve operational problems. Halfway through the meeting, the chief financial officer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Our implementation costs are now 18% above projection, he said carefully. Silence followed. Ethan leaned back. Why? The executive hesitated. Several departments are working from different assumptions. Another uncomfortable pause settled across the room. Ethan glanced around the table. Nobody spoke immediately. Finally, someone said what everyone had been thinking. We lost a lot of institutional knowledge over the last year. The phrase sounded harmless, professional, neutral, yet everyone understood its meaning. They were talking about Ariana without saying her name. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Companies evolve, he said. People leave. We adapt. Heads nodded. The meeting moved on. Still, the uneasiness remained. Thousands of miles away, Ariana sat inside a conference room reviewing a struggling healthcare startup. The company faced severe operational challenges. Investors doubted its future. Employees feared layoffs. The founders seemed overwhelmed. Ariana listened quietly as they described the situation. When they finished, she asked only 3 questions. The room fell silent. No one had considered those issues. Within 30 minutes, she identified weaknesses that months of meetings had overlooked. By the end of the session, The founders looked relieved for the first time all day. As everyone packed their materials, one investor approached her. "How do you see things other people miss?" Ariana smiled faintly. "I do not look at what people hope will happen. I look at what is already happening." The answer stayed with him long after she left. Weeks turned into months. Her reputation continued growing. Boardrooms began requesting her specifically. Investors sought her analysis before making decisions. Founders trusted her judgment. She never chased attention. She simply delivered results. One evening after work, Ariana returned to her apartment carrying a folder of documents. Snowflakes drifted past the window as she placed the folder on her kitchen table. Her phone buzzed unexpectedly. A social media notification appeared. Someone had tagged her in an article. Curious, she opened it. The headline featured Ethan and Chloe attending another high-profile charity gala. Their photograph filled the screen. Camera flashes reflected off polished marble floors. They looked successful, happy, untouchable. Ariana studied the image for several seconds. Then she surprised herself. She felt nothing. No jealousy, no anger, no sadness, only distance. The realization caught her off guard. For so long she believed healing would arrive dramatically. Some grand emotional breakthrough. Instead it came quietly on an ordinary winter evening while snow fell outside her window. She set the phone down and returned to her work. The article no longer mattered. The next morning, Ethan arrived early at headquarters. The city remained dark beyond the glass walls. He entered his office carrying a stack of reports and paused beside a bookshelf near the corner. Something caught his attention. Tucked between awards and industry plaques sat an old framed photograph. He had not looked at it in years. The picture showed a cramped office above a Brooklyn coffee shop. 2 folding desks. A cheap printer. Tangled cables. And standing beside him was Ariana. Both of them looked exhausted. Both were smiling. Ethan stared at the image longer than he intended. Back then they had no investors. No luxury offices. No headlines. Just determination. He reached toward the frame, then stopped. A knock interrupted the moment. His assistant entered carrying urgent reports. Another project delay. Another budget concern. Another issue requiring immediate attention. Ethan turned away from the photograph and focused on business. Yet as the day unfolded, the image remained fixed in his mind. Somewhere between success and ambition, a chapter of his life had quietly closed. And for the first time, he began wondering whether he had truly understood its value before it disappeared. 7 years can transform a city, a company, and a person, but the most powerful transformations are often invisible until the moment they are revealed. By the spring of the 7th year, Boston no longer felt temporary to Ariana Brooks. The city had become home. The uncertainty that once followed her through every decision had been replaced by confidence earned through countless hours of work, discipline, and quiet persistence. On a bright Monday morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of Titan Horizon Capital, one of the most influential investment firms in the country. The office occupied the upper floors of a tower overlooking the harbor. Ferries crossed the water below while executives hurried through the financial district carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Inside the firm's executive boardroom, a dozen investors sat around a polished table reviewing a series of major acquisitions. At the center of the discussion sat Ariana. Her posture remained calm. Her voice remained measured. Yet every person in the room listened carefully when she spoke. Years earlier, she had helped build a company from almost nothing. Now she helped guide billions of dollars in investments across multiple industries. Respect had not been handed to her. She had earned it. A presentation appeared on the large screen at the front of the room. Charts, market forecasts, strategic opportunities. One by one, executives shared recommendations. When the discussion reached a difficult manufacturing acquisition, several opinions clashed immediately. Some believed the company should be purchased. Others argued the risks were too high. The debate continued for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, the firm's chairman turned toward Ariana. "What do you think?" The room became quiet. Ariana studied the numbers for a moment before answering. "The company is not failing because of revenue." She pointed toward a section of the report. "It is failing because leadership stopped listening to the people closest to the work." Several executives exchanged surprised glances. She continued, "Fix the culture and the numbers improve. Ignore the culture and no amount of money will solve the problem." The chairman smiled slowly. That is exactly what I was hoping someone would notice. The recommendation was approved. The meeting moved forward. Yet what remained with everyone afterward was not the decision itself. It was Ariana's ability to identify the deeper issue hiding beneath the obvious one. Meanwhile, in New York, Whitmore Dynamics faced a very different reality. The company's headquarters still looked impressive. The glass tower still dominated the skyline. Media outlets still featured Ethan Whitmore at conferences and business events. But behind closed doors, challenges had become impossible to ignore. Growth had slowed. Several ambitious expansions failed to produce expected returns. Competitors gained market share. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions during earnings calls. The confidence that once surrounded the company had begun to crack. Ethan sat alone in his office late one evening reviewing another disappointing quarterly report. Rain streaked the windows while city lights blurred across the glass. The room felt unusually quiet. A notification appeared on his tablet. Forbes, top strategic investors shaping America's future. Distracted, he opened the article. The list featured influential names from across the financial world. He skimmed casually until his eyes stopped moving. Ariana Brooks. The photograph showed her standing beside a group of executives outside Titan Horizon Capital. She looked composed, accomplished, strong. The accompanying article described her as one of the most respected strategic investors in the country. Ethan read the paragraph twice, then a third time. His expression remained neutral, but something tightened inside his chest. 7 years. 7 years since she walked away carrying a single suitcase. 7 years since he convinced himself she would eventually become another chapter in his past. Yet there she was. Not surviving. Not recovering. Thriving. Ethan set the tablet down and stared out at the rain-covered skyline. For reasons he could not fully explain, the article unsettled him more than any negative earnings report. Across the country, Ariana stood near the windows of her office after another successful day. Evening sunlight reflected across the harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. Her assistant approached carrying a folder. "One more item before you leave," she said. Ariana accepted the folder and opened it. Inside was a list of companies being monitored for potential investment opportunities. Most names meant little. Then she reached the final page. Her eyes paused. Whitmore Dynamics. For several seconds, she simply looked at the name. No anger surfaced. No bitterness. Only recognition. The company she once helped build now appeared on a list of struggling businesses being evaluated by one of the largest investment firms in America. Life had a remarkable way of creating circles nobody could predict. Ariana closed the folder carefully and looked out across the harbor once more. The setting sun cast long shadows across the water. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, Ethan Whitmore sat inside an office wondering how she had become so successful. Neither of them knew it yet, but the distance between their worlds was beginning to disappear. And the next chapter of their story was already moving quietly toward them. The first signs of collapse rarely arrive with alarms. They appear as small cracks that everyone assumes someone else will fix. Some are settled over New York with heavy heat reflecting off glass towers and crowded sidewalks. Inside Whitmore Dynamics, the atmosphere had changed in ways that could no longer be hidden behind polished presentations. Employee turnover reached levels the company had never experienced before. Senior managers left for competitors. Product launches missed deadlines. Customer satisfaction scores continued slipping. Every department seemed to be working harder while producing less. One Tuesday morning, Ethan Whitmore entered the executive boardroom carrying a folder filled with financial reports. The room felt tense. Before the meeting even began, board members sat quietly reviewing documents. Several investors had joined through video conference. Nobody smiled. Nobody exchanged casual conversation. The numbers projected on the large screen spoke for themselves. Revenue growth had slowed for the fourth consecutive quarter. Operating expenses continued rising. 2 major expansion projects were now significantly over budget. Ethan stood at the front of the room and began explaining recovery plans. His voice remained confident, but confidence no longer carried the same weight it once had. Questions came quickly. Hard questions. Direct questions. Questions without easy answers. By the time the meeting ended, the room felt heavier than when it began. Several board members remained behind after Ethan left. Their private discussion lasted nearly an hour. Across the city, financial analysts had started noticing the same pattern. Articles appeared describing Whitmore Dynamics as a company struggling to maintain momentum. Market commentators debated whether leadership had become too aggressive. Investors grew nervous. The stock price began slipping. At first only a few points, then more. Meanwhile, Chloe Kensington continued insisting the company needed stronger branding campaigns and larger public initiatives. She believed confidence would attract confidence. Ethan wanted to believe she was right. Yet each new report arriving on his desk pointed toward deeper structural problems. Problems marketing could not solve. Problems publicity could not disguise. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Ethan sat alone reviewing a stack of internal audits. The city lights outside his office seemed dimmer than usual. He loosened his tie and rubbed his eyes. Hours passed. Page after page revealed the same pattern. Teams were disconnected. Communication had deteriorated. Strategic decisions lacked coordination. Nobody appeared to understand the entire picture anymore. Then he found a familiar phrase buried inside one report. Institutional knowledge loss. Ethan stared at those words. He had seen them before. Again and again. Different departments. Different reports. Same conclusion. For years he ignored what those reports implied. Now he could no longer avoid it. The systems Ariana once built had gradually disappeared after she left. New processes replaced old ones. New leaders introduced new priorities. Each change seemed reasonable at the time. Yet collectively they had removed the very foundation that kept the company aligned. Hundreds of miles away, Ariana Brooks stepped onto a stage in Chicago to address a gathering of investors and entrepreneurs. The ballroom lights reflected across polished tables while hundreds of attendees listened attentively. Her presentation focused on sustainable growth and leadership responsibility. She spoke without notes, without theatrics, without exaggerated promises. The strongest companies are not built around personalities, she said. They are built around principles that remain effective even when leadership changes. The audience remained silent, focused, engaged. She continued. When organizations stop listening to the people closest to the work, decline begins long before the numbers reveal it. Several executives exchanged thoughtful glances. The statement resonated because it was true. After the event ended, investors lined up to introduce themselves. Founders asked for advice. Industry leaders requested future meetings. Ariana handled each conversation with the same calm professionalism she had developed over years of experience. She no longer needed recognition. Recognition found her anyway. Later that night, she returned to her hotel room overlooking downtown Chicago. The city shimmered beneath the summer sky. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email from Titan Horizon Capital. Subject, Priority Review Candidate. Ariana opened the message. Attached was a detailed report concerning a publicly traded technology company facing increasing financial pressure. She began reading casually. Then her attention sharpened. Every page revealed familiar details, familiar names, familiar challenges. By the time she reached the final page, she already knew the conclusion before reading it. Whitmore Dynamics was no longer experiencing temporary setbacks. The company was approaching a genuine crisis. Ariana closed the file slowly and walked toward the window. Traffic moved through the streets far below. 7 years earlier, she had walked away from that company, believing the chapter was finished forever. Now circumstances were quietly bringing it back into her life. Not through emotion, not through memory, through business. Somewhere in Manhattan, Ethan sat alone inside his office watching another negative market report appear on his screen. Somewhere in Chicago, Ariana stared across a city skyline, while a familiar company name rested inside her inbox. Neither of them slept easily that night. Because for the first time, the paths they had spent 7 years traveling apart were beginning to move toward the same destination. Desperation has a way of stripping away every illusion a person once believed about control. By early autumn, the pressure surrounding Whitmore Dynamics had become impossible to ignore. Financial news networks discussed the company almost daily. Market analysts questioned leadership decisions. Investors who once competed for meetings now requested explanations. The confidence that had defined the company for years was slowly being replaced by uncertainty. On a gray Thursday morning, Ethan Whitmore entered the executive boardroom, and immediately sensed something had changed. The atmosphere felt heavier, more final. Board members sat in silence reviewing reports spread across the table. Nobody exchanged casual greetings. Nobody discussed weekend plans. Even the view beyond the glass walls seemed muted beneath low clouds hanging over Manhattan. Ethan took his seat. The meeting began. Numbers appeared on the screen. Revenue declines. Rising debt obligations. Delayed contracts. Missed projections. Each slide seemed worse than the one before it. The chief financial officer spoke carefully, choosing every word with precision. At our current trajectory, liquidity becomes a significant concern within the next 2 quarters. Silence followed. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan leaned forward. We have recovery initiatives already underway. The chief financial officer nodded. We do. But the market is losing confidence faster than those initiatives can produce results. Nobody argued. Because everyone knew it was true. The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours. Every solution carried risks. Every opportunity required resources they no longer possessed. By the time the meeting ended, one reality had become unavoidable. Whitmore Dynamics needed outside help. Not next year. Not next quarter. Soon. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood alone in his office watching rain move across the city skyline. His phone rang repeatedly. Investors, advisors, journalists. He ignored most of them. For the first time in his professional life, he felt genuinely uncertain about the future. Chloe entered carrying a tablet. There is still time to control the narrative, she said confidently. We need stronger messaging. Ethan looked away from the window. Normally he would have agreed. Normally public perception mattered. But something about the phrase felt hollow now. Messaging would not solve debt. Messaging would not rebuild trust. Messaging would not repair years of decisions whose consequences were finally arriving all at once. This is bigger than narrative, he said quietly. Chloe frowned but offered no response. Across the country, Ariana Brooks sat inside a conference room at Titan Horizon Capital reviewing potential investment opportunities. Rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking Boston Harbor. The room contained only a handful of senior partners. Large screens displayed financial reports from several companies under consideration. One by one, opportunities were discussed and evaluated. Then Whitmore Dynamics appeared on the screen. The room became noticeably more attentive. Everyone recognized the company. Everyone understood its significance. One partner adjusted his glasses. They are approaching a critical point. Another nodded. The fundamentals are damaged, but not beyond repair. Ariana remained silent as others shared opinions. She studied the numbers carefully, the same way she always did. Without emotion, without assumptions, just facts. Yet beneath the professional analysis existed a strange awareness. She knew this company better than anyone in the room, better than many people still working there. She understood its strengths, its weaknesses, its culture, its history. Most importantly, she understood what it had once been before years of misalignment slowly pushed it off course. What do you think? The chairman finally asked. Several eyes turned toward Ariana. She paused before answering. The company can survive. The room remained silent. She continued. But survival will require more than capital. It will require leadership willing to confront uncomfortable truths. The chairman nodded thoughtfully. Notes were taken. Discussions continued. Yet her words lingered long after the meeting moved forward. That evening, as darkness settled across Manhattan, Ethan received another troubling call. One of the company's largest lenders had declined additional credit extensions. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, Ethan remained seated at his desk staring at the silent phone. Outside, headlights moved through rain-soaked streets below. For years he had believed determination could solve anything. Now determination alone no longer seemed enough. Hundreds of miles away, Ariana stood near her apartment window overlooking the harbor. City lights reflected across black water while distant boats moved through the night. Her phone buzzed with an internal message from Titan Horizon. A special review committee had been authorized. The firm was preparing to evaluate a potential rescue investment. She already knew which company they meant. Ariana set the phone aside and looked toward the horizon. 7 years earlier, she had walked away from a future she thought was gone forever. Now that same future appeared to be moving back toward her one careful step at a time. Neither she nor Ethan could see the full picture yet. But somewhere between desperation and opportunity, fate had quietly begun arranging a meeting neither of them would ever forget. Hope often arrives disguised as a question. 3 weeks after the emergency review committee was formed, Whitmore Dynamics received a message that changed everything. It arrived on a quiet Monday morning through legal channels rather than public announcements. No press release, no media leak, no dramatic headlines. Just a formal communication informing the board that a major investment group had expressed interest in evaluating a strategic rescue package. The news spread through headquarters within hours. Employees who had spent months worrying about layoffs suddenly found a reason to breathe again. Department leaders began whispering about possibilities. Investors reacted cautiously but positively. For the first time in months, a path forward appeared visible. Ethan Whitmore sat at the head of the boardroom table reviewing the proposal while rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking Manhattan. Every page raised new questions. The potential investment was substantial, large enough to stabilize operations, large enough to restore confidence, large enough to save the company. Yet one detail immediately captured everyone's attention. The identity of the lead decision maker remained confidential. The investment group would not disclose who held final authority until a formal meeting occurred. Several board members exchanged curious looks. Why the secrecy? One asked. Another shrugged. Some firms operate that way. Ethan continued reading. Then he reached the final page. A single condition appeared beneath the preliminary terms. The chief executive officer must attend a private strategic review meeting in person. No substitutes. No representatives. No exceptions. Silence settled across the room. Ethan read the sentence twice. Something about it felt unusual. Not threatening. Not hostile. Intentional. Across the table, the chairman leaned back thoughtfully. They want direct access to leadership. Ethan nodded slowly. Apparently, the meeting ended with cautious optimism. For the first time in nearly a year, the board had something concrete to pursue. Yet uncertainty remained. Nobody knew who stood behind the offer. Nobody knew what questions would be asked. Nobody knew what conditions might follow. Hundreds of miles away, inside Titan Horizon Capital's Boston headquarters, Ariana Brooks reviewed the same proposal from the opposite side of the process. Morning sunlight illuminated the conference room while senior partners discussed strategy. Detailed reports covered the table. Financial models filled digital screens. Every aspect of Whitmore Dynamics had been analyzed. Revenue, debt, operations, leadership, culture. Nothing had been overlooked. One partner adjusted his glasses. The company is salvageable. Another nodded. But only if structural issues are addressed immediately. Ariana listened quietly. Her attention remained fixed on a series of internal reports she had reviewed repeatedly over the previous week. Every document confirmed the same conclusion. The company was not failing because its products lacked value. It was failing because leadership had drifted away from the principles that once made it successful. Eventually, the chairman turned toward her. If this proceeds, you understand you will be leading the review. The room became still. Ariana looked toward the harbor visible beyond the glass walls. Boats moved across calm water beneath a pale autumn sky. 7 years earlier, she had left Whitmore Dynamics believing she would never see its boardroom again. Life had other plans. I understand, she said calmly. No further explanation was necessary. Later that evening, Ariana remained alone in her office long after most employees had gone home. The city glowed outside while shadows stretched across the room. A folder rested on her desk containing photographs, reports, and historical records dating back nearly a decade. She opened one page and paused. An old image showed two young entrepreneurs standing inside a cramped office above a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Folding tables, whiteboards covered in handwritten ideas, endless determination. Ariana studied the photograph quietly. Time had changed almost everything. Yet some truths remained untouched. The company had been built by people who believed in creating something meaningful. Somewhere along the way, that purpose had been lost. She closed the folder gently. This was no longer about personal history. It was about thousands of employees, hundreds of families, and a business that still deserved a chance to survive. Back in New York, Ethan stood alone near the windows of his office overlooking the city. The rescue proposal rested on his desk. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement below. For months, he had carried the weight of uncertainty. Now opportunity stood directly in front of him. Yet he could not shake the strange feeling that accompanied it. Whoever controlled this decision clearly understood the company. The questions being asked were too precise. The requirements too deliberate. The entire process felt designed by someone who knew exactly where the weaknesses existed. Ethan stared at the skyline as evening settled over Manhattan. Somewhere out there, an unknown decision-maker was evaluating whether his company deserved another chance. He had no idea that the person preparing to make that decision already knew more about Whitmore dynamics than anyone else in the world. And in only a few days, a door would open, a familiar face would step through it, and 7 years of distance would disappear in a single moment. The morning of the meeting arrived beneath a sky the color of steel. Low clouds hung above Manhattan while a cold wind moved between towers of glass and concrete. Inside Whitmore Dynamics headquarters, employees carried on with their routines, unaware that the next few hours could determine the future of the entire company. Ethan Whitmore stood alone in his office adjusting his cufflinks as he reviewed the agenda one final time. The rescue investment review would begin at 10 o'clock sharp. Every major board member would attend. Representatives from the investment group would arrive shortly before the meeting. Yet, even now, the identity of the person leading the evaluation remained unknown. That uncertainty lingered in the back of his mind. Over the previous week, he had studied every available detail. The questions submitted by the investment group were unusually specific. They focused on operational culture, leadership accountability, and long-term sustainability rather than publicity or short-term returns. Whoever designed the review process clearly understood the company at a level that felt almost personal. At 9:45, the boardroom began filling with executives. Conversations remained quiet. Coffee cups rested beside tablets and folders. Large windows revealed the Manhattan skyline stretching toward the horizon. Everyone understood what was at stake. Failure would mean continued decline. Success could save thousands of jobs and restore confidence in the company. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table. Chloe sat nearby reviewing notes. The chairman checked his watch repeatedly. Tension settled over the room like a heavy curtain. At exactly 10 o'clock, the conference room doors remained closed. A few executives exchanged curious glances. Then, 30 seconds later, the doors opened. The room became still. A group of professionals entered first. Attorneys, analysts, senior advisors. Their expressions remained calm and unreadable. They took seats along one side of the room. Then another figure appeared in the doorway. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Time seemed to hesitate. Ariana Brooks stepped into the room. Her dark navy suit was elegant but understated. A leather portfolio rested in one hand. Her posture was calm, confident, effortless. The years had refined her presence without hardening it. She carried herself with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer needed approval from anyone in the room. Silence expanded across the boardroom. One executive blinked twice as if questioning what he was seeing. Another lowered his glasses. Chloe's expression froze. Even the chairman appeared caught off guard. Ethan stared at the doorway. His mind struggled to connect the image before him with the memories he carried from 7 years earlier. The woman standing there was familiar, yet transformed. The uncertainty that once lived behind her eyes had disappeared. In its place stood authority, accomplishment, strength. Ariana met the room with composed professionalism. No anger, no triumph, no visible emotion beyond polite focus. Her gaze briefly passed across the table before settling on the chairman. "Good morning," she said. Her voice remained calm and steady. "Thank you for meeting with us." The chairman rose slowly. "Ms. Brooks." The title sounded different now. Respectful. Earned. Ariana nodded politely and moved toward the opposite end of the table. Several members of her team opened laptops and organized documents. The room remained unusually quiet. Ethan had prepared for difficult questions. He had prepared for negotiations. He had prepared for scrutiny. He had not prepared for this. Ariana placed her portfolio on the table and opened a folder. "Before we begin," she said, "I would like to thank everyone for making time available on short notice." Her professionalism somehow made the moment even more surreal. There was no reference to the past, no mention of personal history, nothing that suggested she had once helped build the very company she was now evaluating. One board member finally found his voice. You are leading the review? Ariana looked toward him. Yes. The answer was simple, direct, final. The reality settled across the room. The anonymous decision-maker. The person controlling the rescue proposal. The individual whose recommendation could determine the company's future. It was Ariana. Ethan felt a strange mixture of disbelief and admiration. 7 years earlier, she had walked away carrying a single suitcase. Now she sat across from an entire board of executives with the authority to decide whether Whitmore Dynamics deserved another chance. Ariana opened the first report. Let us begin. Large screens illuminated around the room. Financial models appeared. Operational analyses. Strategic evaluations. Every weakness. Every challenge. Every opportunity. The review started immediately. Professional. Structured. Thorough. Yet beneath every chart and projection existed a deeper truth nobody could ignore. The woman they once underestimated now held more influence over the company's future than anyone else in the room. And as sunlight slowly broke through the clouds outside, casting pale light across the boardroom windows, Ethan realized that the chapter he thought had ended 7 years ago had just walked back through the door. For the next 3 hours, the boardroom became a mirror that reflected truths nobody had wanted to face. The large screens displayed reports, projections, operational reviews, and strategic assessments. Every number told part of the story. Every chart revealed another layer. Yet what unsettled the room most was not the data itself. It was the precision behind it. Ariana Brooks knew exactly where to look. She knew which departments to examine first, which decisions had created long-term damage, which warning signs had been ignored. She moved through the presentation with calm professionalism, never raising her voice, never showing emotion, never making anything personal. That restraint somehow made every observation more powerful. One slide revealed declining employee retention across key leadership positions. Another highlighted communication failures between divisions that once worked seamlessly together. Then came a series of reports examining operational efficiency. The room grew noticeably quieter. Ethan sat motionless, listening. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Chloe maintained a composed expression, but even she seemed increasingly uneasy as the review continued. Ariana clicked to the next slide. A timeline appeared on the screen stretching back nearly a decade. This, she said calmly, is where the pattern begins. The room focused on the display. Several executives leaned forward. The timeline highlighted a sequence of organizational changes implemented over the years. Individually, none appeared significant. Together, however, they revealed a different story. Departments that once collaborated closely had been separated. Reporting structures had become more complicated. Decision-making processes grew increasingly centralized. Employee feedback mechanisms disappeared. The cultural foundations that originally supported the company had gradually eroded. Ariana paused briefly. The company did not arrive at this moment because of one mistake. Her voice remained steady. It arrived here because dozens of small decisions moved it away from the principles that originally made it successful. Silence followed. Nobody argued, because the evidence sat directly in front of them. One board member finally spoke. Can those systems be rebuilt? Ariana looked toward him. Yes. A measure of relief appeared across several faces. Then she continued. But only if leadership is willing to acknowledge why they disappeared. In the first place, the relief faded. The room became quiet again. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly toward the table. He understood exactly what she meant. For years he had believed growth justified every adjustment, every restructuring, every shortcut, every shift in priorities. Looking back now, he realized many of those decisions had created distance between leadership and the people doing the actual work. Ariana moved to another slide. This one contained documents dating back to the company's earliest years. Several executives looked confused. The records were old, nearly forgotten. Yet Ariana treated them as if they were the most important documents in the room. Before discussing investment terms, she said, it is important to understand something about the company's original foundation. The screen changed. An early strategic framework appeared. Then another. Then another. Several pages contained annotations. Operational principles. Leadership philosophies. Growth models. The chairman adjusted his glasses. Where did these come from? Ariana met his gaze calmly. The original company archives. She clicked forward again. The name at the bottom of the documents became visible. Ariana Brooks. A quiet reaction moved through the room. Several board members exchanged surprised looks. Ethan stared at the screen. The documents continued appearing. Product strategies, expansion plans, cultural development frameworks, core operational systems. Many of the ideas that eventually became central to the company's success had originated years earlier, long before the headlines, long before the public recognition, long before anyone paid attention. Ariana never emphasized the revelation. She simply presented facts. Yet the impact was undeniable. One executive whispered softly, almost to himself, "You built half of this company." Ariana did not immediately answer. She closed one folder and opened another. "Many people helped build this company," she said finally. "The point is not who deserves credit." Her eyes moved across the room. "The point is understanding what worked and why." That answer somehow carried more weight than any claim of ownership ever could. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. For years he had told himself a convenient story. A story in which success belonged primarily to him. A story where Ariana played an important role but remained part of the background. Sitting in that room, surrounded by evidence, he could no longer maintain that illusion. The reality was far more complicated, far more humbling. Ariana continued the review without dwelling on the past. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. Every person in the room now understood they were not simply speaking with a successful investor. They were speaking with someone whose fingerprints remained embedded throughout the company's history. Someone who understood its strengths better than anyone present. Someone who recognized every mistake because she remembered what existed before those mistakes were made. Outside, sunlight reflected against the surrounding skyscrapers as afternoon settled over Manhattan. Inside the boardroom, a different realization continued spreading quietly from person to person. The woman sitting across from them had not returned seeking recognition. She had returned carrying something far more valuable. The truth. And for the first time in many years, Whitmore Dynamics was finally being forced to look directly at it. The meeting ended shortly before sunset, but nobody rushed to leave. The weight of what had been revealed lingered throughout the boardroom long after the screens went dark. Executives gathered their documents quietly. Conversations were brief, thoughtful, controlled. The confidence that once defined the company had been replaced by something far more valuable. Honesty. Ethan Whitmore remained seated for several moments after most people stood. Through the windows, Manhattan glowed beneath fading afternoon light. He watched reflections move across the glass while pieces of the past rearranged themselves inside his mind. Across the room, Ariana Brooks organized her files with the same calm professionalism she had displayed all day. There was no sign of victory in her expression, no satisfaction, no resentment. She looked exactly as she had throughout the entire review, focused on the work, focused on the future. One board member approached her cautiously. "Your analysis was extraordinary," he said. Ariana offered a polite smile. The data told the story. Most people would have walked away from a company after everything that happened. Ariana paused briefly before answering. Most people are not responsible for thousands of employees. The answer stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Eventually, the boardroom emptied. Only a handful of people remained. Ethan gathered his notes slowly. For several seconds, he considered leaving without speaking. Then something stopped him. 7 years of assumptions suddenly felt impossible to carry any longer. He walked toward her side of the room. Ariana looked up as his footsteps approached. The silence between them felt different now. Not hostile, not comfortable, simply honest. Ethan stopped several feet away. "You could have embarrassed us today." Ariana closed a folder carefully. "That was never my goal." Her response came immediately, without hesitation. Ethan nodded once. Somehow that answer affected him more than criticism would have. Most people would have taken the opportunity. Ariana met his gaze calmly. Most people were not responsible for helping build this place. The words settled heavily in the quiet room. Outside, sunlight continued fading behind distant skyscrapers. Ethan looked away briefly toward the skyline. "I did not realize how much of the foundation came from you." For the first time all day, a trace of emotion appeared in Ariana's eyes. Not anger, not sadness, something closer to acceptance. "You were not the only one." Ethan understood exactly what she meant. For years, many people had overlooked contributions that were not attached to headlines or interviews. Success had created a narrative. The narrative had become easier to believe than reality. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Ethan asked the question he had been carrying since she walked through the boardroom door. Why did you agree to do this? Ariana looked toward the city beyond the windows. Lights were beginning to appear throughout Manhattan as evening settled over the skyline. Because the company can still be saved. Ethan waited. He sensed there was more. Eventually, she continued. And because there are nearly 5,000 employees whose families depend on what happens next. Her voice remained calm. Yet the conviction behind it filled the room. Most of them had nothing to do with the decisions that created these problems. Ethan lowered his eyes. The answer struck him harder than he expected. She had every reason to walk away. Every reason to let others solve the mess. Instead, she returned because she was thinking about people who would never know her name. That realization revealed more about her character than any presentation ever could. Later that evening, Ariana returned to her hotel overlooking Central Park. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows. She set her briefcase near the desk and stood quietly for a moment. Her phone vibrated. A message from Titan Horizon's chairman appeared. Outstanding work today. The board is prepared to move forward if you recommend it. Ariana read the message twice. Then she placed the phone aside and walked toward the window. Below, streams of headlights moved through the streets. Somewhere among those lights existed thousands of employees waiting for answers. Thousands of families depending on decisions made inside conference rooms they would never enter. Across the city, Ethan sat alone inside his office reviewing notes from the day's meeting. Yet he found himself reading very little. His attention kept returning to the same realization. Ariana had changed beyond anything he imagined possible. Not simply in success. Not simply in status. She had become exactly the kind of leader Whitmore Dynamics needed. The painful truth was that she might always have been that leader. He was only seeing it clearly now. And as darkness settled completely across Manhattan, both of them understood that the next decision would determine far more than the future of a company. It would reveal what kind of people they had become during the 7 years that changed everything. The final recommendation meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. By then, word had quietly spread throughout Whitmore Dynamics that a decision was approaching. Employees checked internal messages more often than usual. Managers held tense conversations behind closed doors. Investors waited for updates. Nobody knew exactly what would happen, but everyone understood that the future of the company rested on a single choice. Early that morning, Ariana Brooks arrived at headquarters before most executives. The city was still waking beneath a pale autumn sky. She stood alone near the boardroom windows, looking out across Manhattan as sunlight slowly reflected off the surrounding buildings. 7 years earlier, she had left this city carrying disappointment, uncertainty, and a broken vision of the future. Now she stood here again, not as someone seeking validation, but as someone trusted to make a decision that would affect thousands of lives. The thought carried weight, yet it did not feel heavy. It felt clear. A short time later, the board assembled. Ethan Whitmore entered last. The exhaustion of recent months showed in ways that expensive suits and professional composure could no longer hide. He took his seat quietly. Across the table sat Ariana and the Titan Horizon team. The atmosphere felt different from previous meetings. Less defensive, more honest. The chairman opened the discussion with a brief summary. Financial projections were reviewed. Recovery strategies were presented. Operational reforms were outlined. Then, eventually, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The chairman turned toward Ariana. "We are prepared to hear your recommendation." Silence settled over the room. Ariana folded her hands calmly on the table. Her gaze moved briefly across the executives, the board members, and finally the windows overlooking the city beyond. When she spoke, her voice remained steady. The company can be saved. Relief appeared immediately on several faces. Yet she continued before anyone could interrupt. But only if everyone understands something important. The room listened carefully. This company did not become successful because of one person. It succeeded because thousands of people believed in a shared mission. Engineers, analysts, administrators, managers, teams who worked long hours. Because they believed they were building something meaningful. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. Ariana continued. Somewhere along the way, that mission became secondary to growth. Then growth became secondary to image. Eventually, the foundation weakened. Her words were direct, but not cruel. Honest without being personal. Money alone will not fix that. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. Every sentence felt true. Ariana opened a folder and reviewed one final document. Then she looked up again. Titan Horizon is prepared to proceed with the rescue investment. A quiet wave of relief moved through the room. Several executives exchanged stunned glances. One board member actually exhaled aloud. Months of fear seemed to loosen all at once. Yet what happened next surprised everyone even more. A board member leaned forward. "May I ask something?" Ariana nodded. "After everything that happened, why would you do this?" The question hung in the air. Nobody interrupted. Nobody tried to redirect the conversation. Even Ethan remained completely still. Ariana looked toward the skyline for a moment before answering. Because this was never about Ethan. The room became silent again. And it was never about me. Her eyes returned to the table. There are nearly 5,000 employees connected to this company. Nearly 5,000 families who wake up every day depending on the stability of their jobs. They did not create these problems. They should not pay for them. The simplicity of the answer made it even more powerful. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge, no attempt to settle old scores. Only responsibility, purpose, dignity. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For years he had measured success through valuation, headlines, acquisitions, and market influence. Sitting there, listening to Ariana speak, he realized how incomplete that definition had been. Leadership was not about being admired. It was about protecting people who depended on your decisions. The realization arrived painfully late. After the meeting concluded, executives slowly left the room. Conversations were quieter than usual, more reflective. Eventually, only Ethan and Ariana remained near. The windows overlooking Manhattan. Evening light had begun coloring the skyline in shades of gold and amber. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Ethan finally broke the silence. "I spent years thinking success meant finding someone better." Ariana remained quiet. He looked out at the city. "The truth is that I never replaced what I lost. I only convinced myself that I had." The words were simple, honest. For the first time in many years, there was no performance behind them. Ariana listened without responding immediately. Outside, sunlight reflected across glass towers while the city continued moving below. Life went on. People hurried home. Lights slowly appeared across the skyline. And standing there in the fading light, both of them understood that some lessons require years to learn, while others arrive in a single moment and change everything. Winter returned to New York nearly a year after the rescue agreement was signed. Snow drifted softly between skyscrapers while morning sunlight reflected across the glass exterior of Whitmore Dynamics. The company looked different now, not because the building had changed, but because the people inside it had. Departments communicated again. Employee retention improved. Projects moved forward with discipline and purpose. Investors regained confidence. Customers returned. The company was healthy, stable, growing. Yet the most important transformation could not be measured on a balance sheet. It existed in the culture that had slowly been rebuilt one decision at a time. Ethan Whitmore stood near the window of his office watching snow settle across the city below. The familiar skyline stretched toward the horizon, but the man looking at it was no longer the same person who once believed success alone could solve every problem. The past year had forced him to listen more than he spoke, to ask questions instead of assuming answers, to rebuild trust instead of demanding it. The process had been humbling, necessary, difficult, and worth every step. A framed photograph rested on the shelf beside his desk. The same photograph he once ignored. Two young entrepreneurs standing inside a cramped office above a Brooklyn coffee shop, folding desks, whiteboards, ambition, hope. Years earlier, he looked at that image and saw a beginning. Now he looked at it and understood something deeper. Great achievements are rarely created by one person. They are built through partnership, trust, and shared purpose. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant stepped inside. "The quarterly employee town hall starts in 15 minutes. Ethan nodded. "Thank you." After she left, his gaze briefly returned to the photograph. Then he smiled and walked toward the conference center downstairs. Hundreds of employees filled the room. Some had been with the company for years. Others had joined recently. The energy felt different now, more connected, more optimistic. Ethan stepped onto the stage as applause filled the room. He thanked the teams, recognized individual contributions, and spoke about the future. But before ending, he paused. The room grew quiet. "There is one thing I have learned over the last few years," he said. "Success becomes fragile the moment we stop appreciating the people who helped create it." Silence followed. Genuine silence. The kind that comes when people know they are hearing something honest. Across the country, Ariana Brooks stood inside Titan Horizon Capital's Boston headquarters overlooking the harbor. The winter sky reflected across calm water while ferries moved slowly between docks. Her career had continued expanding. New opportunities arrived constantly. Boards sought her guidance. Investors valued her judgment. Yet despite all the recognition, she remained grounded by the same principle that guided her from the beginning. Build things that matter. Protect people whenever possible. Leave places stronger than you found them. Her assistant entered carrying a folder. The annual impact report is ready. Ariana accepted it and reviewed the first page. Thousands of jobs preserved. Multiple companies stabilized. Communities strengthened. The numbers were impressive, but what mattered most were the lives behind them. As she looked through the report, her phone vibrated. A message appeared from Ethan. "Thank you." The words were simple. Nothing more. No expectations attached. No requests. No attempt to rewrite history. Ariana read the message and looked toward the harbor. A faint smile touched her face. She understood what those two words represented. Not romance. Not a return to the past. Growth. Accountability. Recognition. Sometimes that was enough. She typed a brief response. "Take care of the people who believed in the company." Then she set the phone aside and returned to her work. Outside, winter sunlight illuminated the water while the city continued moving around her. Life had carried both of them far from where they started. The woman who once walked away carrying a single suitcase had become one of the most respected investors in the country. The man who once believed everything could be replaced had learned that some things cannot. Not trust, not character, not the value of a person who helped build your foundation. Their story did not end with revenge. It did not end with regret. It ended with something far rarer. Understanding. Years earlier, one of them left in silence, while the other chased a future he thought he wanted. In the end, both discovered a greater truth. Real success is not measured by power, wealth, or public recognition. It is measured by the lives you improve, the people you protect, and the integrity you maintain when nobody is watching. And as snow continued falling across New York and sunlight shimmered across Boston Harbor, two lives moved forward on separate paths, forever changed by the lessons they had learned and the second chance neither of them expected to find.